Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Ilustrado podcast. In today's episode, we'll be discussing additional commentaries from the recently uploaded video titled The Lost Tranvias of Manila, which is now available on my main YouTube channel. Link is on the description below for those who haven't watched it yet. Also, this podcast is now available on Spotify and iTunes, so be sure to tune in. But before we begin today's episode, I would like to address a few things from my last video about baybayin. Some viewers pointed out in the comment section that they're having issues with my Spanish accent, in particular with my heavy lisping. I'm sorry to say this, but this is simply how I speak the language. I'm more familiar with the Iberian dialect because my learning resources back then were primarily from Spain, such as YouTube news reports from RTVE or Radio Televisión Española and El País. Admittedly, as some of the viewers noted as well, there were some inconsistencies with my lisping. It's mainly due to my Filipino muscle memory interfering with my attempts to pronounce Spanish words in a more Iberian manner. And yes, I say Iberian rather than Castilian because I'm also learning Catalan, which is another language from Spain that involves a lot of lisping. So while I appreciate the feedback, this is just how I sound. Sorry not sorry, but it is what it is. Let's talk about the music I used in the video. In the last podcast, I mentioned my plan to subscribe to sites offering licensed royalty-free music. But luckily, I rediscovered a name that I haven't heard in a long time, and that is Kevin MacLeod. This saved me from spending a fortune on those subscription services. In the meantime, I'll be using some of his tracks in my upcoming videos until I can either afford subscriptions or create my own background music, which is still in progress. I also want to apologize for the low volume of the background music, as I am still fine-tuning the perfect balance for my videos. I also had the privilege for a fruitful conversation with Sir Ramon Bowman Guillermo during the 2024 CISIA Academic Conference at the UP Diliman Asian Center. He shared with me his paper titled, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce this, Magkunkuno ti Makina, Python Code for the Computer-Assisted Reading of Hanuno'o Mangyan Ambahan. Although his study primarily focuses on the Hanuno'o script, it sheds light on the reasoning behind the use of the danda symbol in baybayin, as seen in the Doctrina Christiana. Using computer-assisted reading, or CAR, powered by Python, Sir Bowman's research reveals that 7-syllable sequences run efficiently in Python CAR, whereas longer sequences demand significantly more processing time. By segmenting text into shorter syllables, he demonstrated how this method improves performance, offering insights into the absence of spaces in pre-colonial Filipino scripts. I will put the paper in the description below for those who haven't read it yet. I also managed to purchase Sir Rolando Borinaga's book, Surat Binisaya, Deciphering Ancient Visayan Writing and Language. I stumbled upon the book while thoroughly browsing the shelves in the UP Press Store, and luckily, there were still a few copies left. But since it's already out of print from New Day publishers, chances are, by the time you hear this, it might be hard to find. In the book, he delves into his research on baybayin artifacts, including the Kalatagan pot inscriptions, and compares his findings with other experts like Sir Bowman and Sir Jean-Paul Putet. I had the opportunity to meet Sir Borinaga at the 2024 Manila International Book Fair during the launch of his book, The Conquest of the Philippines by the United States, 1898-1925, published by Vibal. During the event, we discussed his baybayin discoveries and his experiences with his mentor, the Polish priest Father Kantius Kobak, a renowned expert on Visayan and Samar history. For those interested, Father Kobak's life and works are detailed in a biography written by Carl Sanchez Bordeos and published by the Polish Embassy in Manila. I also picked up Sir Ian Alfonso's new book, Munting Aklat ng Baybayin, a compact guide written in Tagalog or Filipino, perfect for students and enthusiasts exploring baybayin. This book was launched during the 2024 Philippine Historical Association Conference at UP Los Baños, and for those interested, it's now available for purchase online. And with that out of the way, Let's begin with our podcast episode about the lost Tranvias of Manila. The research for this project has been years in the making, starting way back in 2022. It all started when I got interested in researching about the state of public transportation in the Philippines, and to add some personal anecdotes, my endless gaming sessions of playing Transport Fever 2. And upon discovering the Tranvia, I became deeply immersed in history, starting by reading nearly every available article and blog post online. This eventually led me to explore a wealth of primary sources from digital archives housed in Spanish and American universities and libraries. But unfortunately, life got in the way, and real-life problems meant putting this project on hold in the meantime. Fast forward years later, I was able to return to it and pick up where I left off. When I started this project, I wasn't able to cite my sources properly during my initial research phase, which was a huge mistake on my part that would have saved me countless hours of retracing my steps. Thankfully, I managed to accomplish that, and the video now includes references to the historical maps and documents that were instrumental in reconstructing the Tranvia routes. One of the most daunting tasks that I did for this video was mapping out the entirety of Manila. The process involved a lot of trial and error, especially when working with OpenStreetMap to reconstruct the routes. It took numerous attempts to extract data from the website, but unfortunately, Manila is too crowded that it sometimes put my computer into overdrive due to how many assets there are on the map, given the fact that Manila is one of the densest cities in the world. So I had no choice but to retrace it manually, which is a thankless task in itself, but very rewarding once I finish it. Mapping out the Tranvia routes was no small feat. For example, identifying historical sites like Plaza del Aguila and Plaza de Tondo for the cancelled Morayon line was particularly challenging. I even reached out to experts on Manila urban history, but unfortunately, I didn't receive any responses. I was able to achieve at least 80% accuracy in outlining the locations of the roads, buildings, and other landmarks like churches and plazas. For this, I heavily relied on the following historical maps in chronological order. Leon Monsieur's 1878 map, the Tranvía de Manila, Plano de Trazado, from the Ministerio de Ultramar, now archived in the Archivo Histórico Nacional. The 1907 map of the city of Manila and vicinity from the United States War Department, General Staff, a collection by the American Geographical Society Library, AGSL Digital Map Collection, now archived in the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Two maps archived in the Library of Congress. One is the 1915 map of City of Manila and vicinity from the Office of Department Engineer, Philippine Department, and the other is John Back's 1920 City of Manila, Philippine Islands from the Bureau of Commerce and Industry, Philippine Islands. And last, two 1945 maps from the United States Army Map Service. One titled Manila North, Philippine Islands, Manila City, Luzon, archived in the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee as well, and the other titled Manila South, Philippine Islands, Manila City, Luzon, archived at the University of Texas at Austin as part of the Perry Castañeda Library Map Collection. While finishing my map outline, I stumbled upon two fascinating research papers by Johnson Damian and Daniel Mabasa, published under the University of the Philippines System Emerging Interdisciplinary Research. The papers, one titled Cartographic Reconstruction and Spatial Analysis of Manila's Historical Railway System and Land Use, 1895-1925, using a Geographic Information System, or GIS, and the other titled Historical Transport Network, Mapping Manila's Settlements and Railway, had already tackled mapping the Tranvia network using GIS. What's incredible is that their findings aligned closely with my own work for my video. The difference? They used advanced GIS tools, while I pieced things together the hard way, comparing old maps with the current layout of streets and alleyways. For my research, I relied on Spanish documents like Sobre, Proyecto de Tranvías de Manila and Compañía de los Tranvías de Filipinas, Memoria y Estatutos, which are part of the Ayala Foundation's Filipina Heritage Library Collection. I had planned to visit the library to personally review additional Tranvia-related documents that hadn't been digitized. I even reached out to the library to reserve them, but unfortunately, a scheduling conflict prevented the visit. As a result, I made the most of the library's available digital resources. In addition to these, I drew heavily from articles in the now defunct Street Railway Journal, an incredible resource packed with information. I've barely scratched the surface of its content since my primary focus was on Manila's Tranvia system. Many of the photos featured in my video came from this journal. If you're interested, you can find all the sources listed in the description below. During the aforementioned CCA conference, I had the chance to meet Dr. Ricardo Rico Jose, who I'm a great big fan of since he's the go-to expert when it comes to the history of the Second World War in the Philippines. Honestly, meeting him felt like meeting a rock star. Maybe it's just me, but I tend to fanboy over academic researches I've read about or seen in documentaries and TV shows far more than I ever would over showbiz people, except to the ones I personally like. To add an anecdote, I met a ton of actors and actresses. Some even became close friends. But to tell you the truth, there were only a few that personally excited me, and some are just uninteresting to talk with. Anyways, during the conference, I was discussing to Doc Rico that I was researching about the Tranvia. He mentioned that UP already made a documentary on the subject, which surprised me a bit. At the time, I couldn't find it online, and only the one made by the UP TV YouTube channel was available, where it discusses the documentary itself. It wasn't until a few months later that the documentary was made publicly accessible on the UP Third World Studies Center's YouTube channel. I'll share the link to it in the description below. Doc Rico was also the one who recommended using the previously mentioned maps for the video, so a huge shout out to him, as without his guidance, this research wouldn't have been possible to continue. While searching for a photo of Gregorio Sancianco, I came across an image that frequently appears in Google search results. This particular photo is from the 1977 edition of Nick Joaquin's A Question of Heroes, Essays in Criticism on the 10 Key Figures of Philippine History, which is now available digitally through the Filipinas Heritage Library. However, I decided not to use that photo because I wasn't satisfied with how it looked. Additionally, for the translation of his work, El Progreso de Filipinas, I opted to use Encarnacion Alzona's version, published in 1975 by the then National Historical Institute, now the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or NHCP, instead of attempting to translate it myself, which saved me a lot of time. Some interesting tidbits I found during my research. I forgot to mention the types of land transportation before the tranvía came along, such as the kalisin, karomata, carruaje, and carretela. Each mode had its charm, but the tranvía was truly revolutionary for its time. The Manila-Malabon line, which spanned around 7 kilometers, had two key transfer points, Maypajo in Caloocan and Dulo at the north end of the route. At its southern terminus in Tondo, passengers waited in a simple 2-story wooden structure, while the Malabon terminal was under a humble acacia tree where the conductors sold tickets. The network's rolling stock also included the Manila Railway's Manila-class switchers, which were built by the Hunslet Engine Company. For those unfamiliar with railroad terminology, switchers, or shunters as they are known in British English, are small locomotives designed for coupling, uncoupling, and moving railway vehicles over short distances, usually within the rail yard or depot. Isabelo de los Reyes noted that the Tranvia service starts at 5:30 a.m. in Tondo and concluded at 7:30 p.m., maintaining a consistent schedule. Trips from Malabon started at 6 a.m. and ran until 8 p.m., departing hourly in the mornings and every half hour from 1:30 p.m. onwards if passenger demand was high. However, the Tranvias were infamous for their strict no-stopping rule. It was so strict that even the Archbishop of Manila couldn't board if all the seats were taken. Although the Tranvia enjoyed significant patronage, its operations faced numerous challenges. These included occasional strikes by Tranvia workers, one of which coincided with a bombing incident. A news report described how the tram engineer kicked the bomb into the street, but it accidentally injured 7 pedestrians, including 2 American sailors. Additionally, the system suffered from increasing inefficiencies, ultimately leading to the stopping of operations at some point in 1902. Lastly, it's worth noting that the opening of the LRT faced challenges strikingly similar to those of the Tranvia. Passenger demand for LRT-1 far exceeded the system's capacity, causing the trains to deteriorate rapidly due to overcrowding. To avoid further damage, the trains often had to operate at reduced speeds. Years later, with assistance from Japan, the system underwent rehabilitation, introducing more modern air-conditioned cars. However, these upgrades were still constrained by the original size limitations of the LRT infrastructure. And that's all the time we have for this episode. For more information, please check the description for the sources that I've used. Once again, this is the Ilustrado podcast, signing off.